Hi, thank you for tuning in to the Energy Healing Network. We're privileged to have Jillie Marie joining us today. She's the founder of Transformational Catalyst and Fire and Ice Transformational Coaching. Glad you
I
could join
am.
us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let our audience know where you're joining us from today.
I am in Central North Carolina.
All right. Yeah, we had the privilege of having someone on the show that's actually in the area I'm located in. So we're privileged to be covering the area with all this healing energy.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, want to kind of get into some of the things you have going on. Because you're actually let me get ready for this list now. She's a certified Akashic record practitioner, certified soul alignment, um, advanced sacred soul alignment and sacred light foundations practitioner, Reiki master, medium, intuitive, crystal lover, tarot card reader, light language, space holder, and conduit. Oh, and one of my favorite energy motion coaches.
Yes. Very long list.
It is, but people don't realize how much all of this kind of works together. So
Yes.
kind of let our audience kind of know, with all that long list, how things that you actually do.
So typically people will come to me and they'll come with a real world issue. Like they're depressed or their marriage is crappy or they are fed up, they're confused and overwhelmed, they're experiencing anxiety. And so what we'll do is we'll dig into, I'll say, what's the first emotion that you're feeling? And don't overthink it, just whatever comes in. And then usually we will talk about, we'll start breaking down, what's underneath that. And typically my intuition, I will open their Akashic records and typically my intuition will lead. And I can always tell your energy because your energy leads. I can always tell like if you're not, and people will say, oh, I don't feel angry. I'm like, no, but angry is leading. So subconsciously there's anger going on. It doesn't mean that you're running around the world being like, rah, and mad. No. However, if we're leading with anger energetically, if we're like constantly looking for a fight, we're going to live a very different life than if we're looking to come back to center and come back to peace every single time with every interaction. Like if you're in a space with let's just say you're married and, your husband or your wife is, having a bad day. If you're coming from a space of looking for a fight, it's like, why can't you I can't believe, and nitpicking.
Right.
And being in that space of like, you have all this confusion, overwhelmed, you had a bad day, traffic sucked, the kids are this, da. And all of that is one little big old monkey on your back.
Right.
And you come in with anger and you're like, rah, and you're looking for a fight. And they're going to respond from their wounds. You're responding from their wounds. And all of a sudden you're going around and you're just all, you're fighting, screaming, whatever. And when people say, well, how do I diffuse that? I'm like, you come back to center. So if you're in the space of saying, I'm experiencing anger as an example, allow yourself to feel it. Because a lot of times we're afraid of experiencing our emotions. That's why I hyphenate emotion to energy and motion, because it's just energy.
That's what it is.
And if we can be in the space of, and I tell people, I'm trying to make it user friendly because our media, our culture, our world makes it into like, oh my God, we can't feel anger, grief, whatever. Or we're going to, are you feeling angry? Me too. Come and, destroy buildings and this and this and this. And I'm like, whoa, what if you learn to feel it and just experience it, right? Just be in the space of like, maybe, and I, tell my clients, I'm like, let's just sit in the moment. And typically when they allow themselves to feel the anger, tears start streaming down their face.
Mm-hmm.
Because anger is sadness's bodyguard.
It is defense.
Yes. Yeah. And sadness is guilt, grief, and shame's bodyguard. Mm-hmm. So if we allow ourselves to break those pieces down, typically the client will say something like, I feel disrespected by my spouse because, whatever's going on. And I'll say, okay, but did you ask for what you need? And a very typical response will be, well, I've been married for so many years and they should know me well enough to blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but no one's a mind reader.
Right.
And you're trying to control and you're looking for a fight rather than just saying, babe, I had a day and I just need a minute to decompress. And if you could just hold the space for me and just give me a hug and just let me you didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing to fix or change or whatever. I just need to just for a minute.
Right.
It's going to give you a completely set because you're in a space where they can be in a space of holding you and and taking care of you, which is what you're looking for in the fight anyway. You're trying to get that emotion out because you were never taught as a child. You never had it modeled to you how to safely and correctly feel emotions. So if you could just be in a space of, I'm feeling anger and I just like rant, do what you need to do. And I tell people, like, if you're in the car and you suddenly feel angry, instead of like flipping people off and zipping in and out of traffic and whatever, grab your steering wheel as you're driving and just scream. Just because we hold anger in our jaws. And if we can be in that space of let it out, grab a pillow. And I tell people all the time, like, go to a park, like a parking lot, the Walmart or the Target or your grocery store, someplace where there's a lot of people, where it's no big deal to sit in the back of the parking lot in a car where you're waiting for your person or whatever you're doing, right? And turn up the music and just rage out. Turn on some, rock music or your favorite song or a song you really hate and just, we are never, ever, ever getting back to, just get it out of your system. Because here's the thing, when you burn through it, and you get into the sadness, that you get the tears, and then you get into the space of where the real problem is, right? Where usually it's, you know what? I don't ever ask for what I need. I'm terrified of asking for what I need because when I was a little kid, I got ignored. Or I'm terrified of holding a boundary because I have a huge abandonment wound that's gaping. And if I ask my husband, my spouse, my fiance, my boyfriend, anybody, my coworker, my subordinates, to do a task or whatever, I'm afraid that they're going to say no. So I have no boundaries. So people walk all over me. I don't respect myself, so they don't respect me. And now we're in this loggerhead of 10, 20, 30 years, 5 years, 2 years. A lot of people get married because they're like, oh, well, I want to get married because I'm checking off that box, as opposed to they want the pretty gift. They want all the accolades. They want the social media reactions.
Right.
As opposed to saying, if you want attention, how about you just say, look, I am desperately need attention. I just need someone to love me for a minute. I just need a big hug for like 5 minutes. That would do it. And then I can be like, okay, now I'm in the clear space of what do I really need? What would fulfill me? And that, years down the line is going to take you in the space of, okay, because people will say, well, if I work with you, if I were to coach with you, and I'm like, well, here's the thing. Do you want to keep being argumentative with your spouse? If your marriage is a 2 or 3, and you want it to be a 10, the reality is that every relationship, marriages, friendships, whatever, there are 2 people. And so the reality is, if you're not taking responsibility for your part of it, and that doesn't, and here's the thing, it doesn't mean taking over responsibility and being like, it's all my fault. Because when we say things like it's all my fault, that implies that we take control of it and then we can fix everybody in the loop.
Right.
As opposed to saying, I take responsibility for the fact that I yelled at you, I raised my voice, I was in a bad mood, I came home cranky, and I put that on you, I projected onto you, and that was not okay.
Right.
Whole different outcome to say, look, I was having a bad day. I got pulled. I saw a car accident. My boss was being a jerk today. Nothing worked. I had 10 meetings on Zoom and none of them, everything went helter skelter.
Right.
And I just need to breathe.
Right.
Well, that's going to make it a whole lot easier than being like, why don't you ever take out the trash?
Right.
Exactly. And raging. And so many of us rage because we don't know any other way.
Exactly.
So that's what I do is I break it down for the client, and then I give them a usable, like, 1, let's feel the emotion. Let's get the emotion out, because when we get the anger out of the way, we get the sadness out of the way, we take a breath,
Right.
we can then come into the space of, okay, what's the real problem? And that's usually when the quiet little kid shows up and says, I haven't been happy in my marriage in, 15 years, or, I feel really disrespected. I feel like no one hears me. I have this, I just posted 50 pictures of our vacation on social media. And honestly, there was like one day that was really good, and the rest of it was a shit show.
Right.
And okay, there's honesty. Now, what do you want? Because the fact of the matter is, and I tell clients all the time, the only person you control is you. And what I know for sure is, typically, as you shift and let go of your expectations about all the other parties involved, so too do they shift, because they're going to look at you and go, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on? Because you're changing.
You change the energy.
And when you start alchemizing in a different way entirely, and you're no longer looking for, and the thing is, a lot of people think, alchemy and that sort of thing is like bibbity bobbity boo. And I'm like, no, it's as simple as you coming into a situation and you're not raw, you're not the raging bull. You're just simply saying, hey, yeah, it's been a long day, and I'm going to grab a glass of water. I'm going to grab a glass of wine. I'm going to go grab, something, and give me 5 minutes. I'm going to change clothes. I'm going to go wash my face, maybe brush my teeth, maybe brush the hair. Maybe I'm going to do 3 minutes of yoga and just do a real quick yoga, floor in my bedroom. I'll be right back and do whatever it takes for you to then reset your energy so that you can show up fully and saying, yeah, because, and here's the thing too, is I also teach the tools, because if we can be in the space of, because I don't want people to just be, a lot of times people come in, they go, can you use those things on me? I'm like, sure, I can use Reiki on you. I can use sacred soul alignment on you. I can, tell you in the Akashic records what the best thing to do is. However, I also want you to have the practical piece where you go ground your energy. You realize what's going on so that you can have a practical conversation with the people you love and ask for what you need. And sometimes saying very specifically, like, there's people in my family who, as an example, the dishwasher, right? Dishwasher's always an argument, people that have them. A lot of people have a very specific way they want to load the dishwasher. And, to have the conversation and say, hey, I was going to load the dishwasher. Do you have any? I got it. Okay. Is there anything else I can do to help you? I hear you want me to leave the dishwasher. You stack it a certain way. It works. Cool. Well, could you go dust? Could you go water the plants? Could you go vacuum? Could you go? Sure. Delighted to. So it's that clear communication about what you need. And because here's the thing too, is when I start burning through with a client, like what's really going on, and they start to realize, oh, I have this fear of talking to my husband. Okay. You want a 10 out of 10 marriage, but you're terrified of telling your husband you want him to take out the trash. The trash is a really tiny thing. It's like if you get into an accident and they're like, we got to take this little tiny part of your pinky, but you get to save your whole hand.
Right.
It's the pinky is real. That little tiny pinky piece is, your pinky nail in the big context of life, you still get to write, is no big deal. Right. But so many of us make that little tiny thing this huge deal. Right. And then we're like 2 minutes later, we're at irreconcilable differences. And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, stop a second.
Right.
Because that's not the real truth. The real truth is I have trauma. I had no one or the other, no mom or no dad growing up. I never had a healthy marriage modeled to me, so I have no idea what I'm doing. I only know how to yell and scream and rage to get attention.
Right.
Bad attention is better than no attention.
Yeah.
How many of us are, like nowadays, our kids, how many people are teaching their kids to just be entitled brats, for lack of a better thing?
Yes, you're right.
Well, if you don't like this, then you're a blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I'm just saying that I think that everybody's equal.
Right.
Like, that's
Right.
the whole sentence.
Right.
As opposed to being like, well, if you don't like blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay. And I always break it down as ice cream. I'm like, so if I don't like vanilla ice cream, what does that make me? And most people are like, you don't like vanilla ice cream, big deal.
Right.
And I'm like, but throw any flavor of chocolate in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, gimme.
Mm-hmm.
Put chocolate jimmies on it. I'm going to follow you.
Right.
But here's the thing is, when I say that, I'm like, okay, so what does it make me if I don't like Neapolitan? If I don't like mint chocolate chip? If I have a preference?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, well, you just have a preference of what kind of ice cream you like. What's the problem? And I'm like, throw that into any argument of society.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We just have these things called preferences.
Exactly.
And now we've gotten to a point where it's like, am I hurting anybody if I don't like vanilla ice cream?
Not at all.
Nope. If I prefer my ice cream in a cup versus a cone, am I hurting anybody?
Not
Nope.
at all.
And the thing is when we start being in the space of, if someone doesn't like you, and I tell people all the time, my people pleasers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will say to them, okay, but here's the thing. There's almost 8 billion people on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have 1,000 friends on social media. Let's just say.
Right.
How many of those do you actually know personally? And they'll be like, well, maybe 200, maybe 300. I'm like, okay, so you have 7 billion. And I'm like breaking down the number that either don't know you, don't like you because of whatever. You're Catholic, you're Muslim, you're Jewish, you're black, you're white, you're a woman, you're a man, you're straight, you're gay, you live in the South, in the US, you don't know how to speak any foreign languages. Pick a thing that people just have a natural, and sometimes they're like, you mean there's people? I'm like, there's people that don't even know you, who don't like you for no really good reason.
Yes, indeed.
And they're like, what do you do in that case? And it's like, I'm like, well, the thing is, I'm like, I used to have people that would come up to me when I was still in corporate America, and they would say, oh, you're the bitch. And I would go, yes, tell me more. and I would make a joke out of it because I had no idea what their point of reference was. And I was like, and they would say, well, I was told to call you and that you might be a bitch. And I'd be like, and I said, oh, okay. And I'd say, and they'd say, well, here's the thing that I need. And here's the thing. It wasn't that I was mean. It was that I was in closings for a commercial, for a consumer builder, for a private builder. And I was tough. If I set the closing date for a certain date, my job was to make sure the house closed and the company got the money. That was my job.
Right.
So people giving me their sob story about how they want RDU moved because it's not convenient for them, or how they have 3 different things going and they're doing this and this and this. And can I rearrange all the things for them? Can I close them on December 31st at 8:00 at night? No, I can't.
Right.
It's like the latest I can close you on December 31st is 5:00. That's it. Right. I'm like, any other day of the year that we are legally open and banks are open, I can close you till 7:00 at night. But the reality is December 31st at 5:00, everything has to be at the bank by 5:30 because otherwise it rolls to the new year.
Right.
And people would go, oh. And I'd be like, so I know that everybody has these little things you want to do, but here's the deal. This is how this is going to work. These are my options. You have 2 closing times, pick one. And they'd be like, oh. And I'm like, it's going to be back to back to back to back to back. Nobody wastes time. But the thing is that my reputation preceded me in that case. And I would tell people, the thing is that my people pleasers, I try to pull that out for them because so often we're trying to control.
Right.
We're trying to be in the space of, well, if I can be perfect enough and good enough, everybody will love me. And I'm like, there's still going to be someone who doesn't like you, and it's probably not personal. Right. It's probably not. I mean, one of my best girlfriends is she's a Black soul entrepreneur, and she's fantastic, amazing, beautiful, all the things, people.
Right.
And she has a product that, unfortunately, I don't have any use for, and so I've never bought from her. But I will always pump her up. And I've had people say, "Oh, well, they'll say, well, coming at me about it." And I'm like, I'm going to buy a product that I genuinely have a need for.
Exactly.
And I look out for those things. I could deliberately, reach out to people and say, hey, does anybody have a whatever? I want to support small businesses. I am one.
Right.
But I said, I genuinely and I had even approached her at one point and said, if I was going to give this as a gift, like, how would you approach that conversation? And she kind of laughed and she's like, honey, don't worry about it. It's fine. I know we're cool. It's good. Right. But so often, right, we get into spaces of like, if someone doesn't like us in our perception, and, a lot of times too, it's like, I grew up in a space where one wrong look could get you in trouble sometimes. And I am notorious for being the person who can stare off into space and I'm just staring straight ahead. I'm not staring at any particular person. I'm just spacing out, looking ahead like, okay. And then someone walks across my path and looks at me and they're like, and I'm just still like staring. Right. And it's like, oh, you have an issue with me. I'm like, what? No. I was just staring off into space and you just happened to walk through my vision path and I apologize. No. Right. But again, to get my people pleasers out of that space of it's not freaking personal. Right. And teaching people that, and then teaching them to get into the space of interrelationally, like ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And, a lot of times people, it's funny because when I work with clients, and I just had a client tell me the other day, she said, I just need to thank you. She's a third of the way through her program that she's on with me right now. And she said, I just want to thank you for changing my life, because if it hadn't been for you, she goes, the last couple of weeks would have been a complete crap show. And she said, I am in a totally different place because of you and your coaching. And I'm like, oh, warms my heart.
Yeah, exactly.
And, she said, it's because you combine the practical with the energetics. So yes, I will do healing work. Yes, I will get in your Akashic records and say, is this for your best and highest good? Yes or no? And then, yes, I will use sacred soul alignment, it's a modality created by my friend Alicia Hartzell, and it's energy packets. So it's like, did you ever have Kool-Aid as a kid?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like some of the alignments will bring things in. Like they're going to get rid of the blocks between you and having money or you and having love. So it'd be like you're taking a container of water, right? That's you. And you're tearing open the Kool-Aid that is like love yourself fully, and you're dumping the Kool-Aid in. So it's going to bring in loving yourself, and it's also going to pull apart the stuff that makes you not love yourself. So the stories, the overthinking, the anxiety, etc., and pulling that out, right?
Right.
And so I combine all of those things. So I'm doing the energetic work with you, and I'm also giving you very practical things like, okay, we're going to write a letter not to be sent, to burn all of the energy out. I want you to say all the things. I want you to get scritchy about it. If you're writing, and when someone's, will say, what do you mean by get scritchy? I'm like, you're writing. You're not paying attention to grammar. You don't care what it said. You're just like, I'm so angry with you. Blah, 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 blah. Right. And if you tear the page, the world's not going to end. You're going to write this letter. I tell people, I give them a time limit. I'm like, if you're still writing, keep going. But it's just trying to get all that emotion out onto paper, and then you're going to read it. And you're going to read it maybe, once a week or whatever, until you're like, this is boring. Right. Until you get all the anger, all the resentment, all the sadness, all the grief out of it. And then you read it to the point where you go, this is no longer like, this isn't doing anything for me.
Right.
It's not serving me. And then you shred it and you burn it. Because here's the thing, when you get all that energy out and you're no longer coming from raw, right? It's so much easier to come up and say, man, babe, I love you. And I'm sorry. I've just been being a jerk lately. And I just have a lot going on in my head. And not in a space right now where I want to talk about it. I just wanted you to let you know that it's not you, it's me. Right. I'm taking responsibility for that, because typically that is going to soften the other person involved, whether it's your spouse, your parents, your kids, whatever, to a space of, well, if you need to talk, if you need an ear, I'm here.
Right.
As opposed to, well, you da too, right? Softening those things. And then we shift the relationship. And it's one of my clients who was very hesitant to work with me. We were working together, and she reached out to me one day. She goes, I have to tell you something. I said, okay. And she said, my husband and I had the most amazing intimacy we've had in like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's fantastic. And she goes, yeah, I got clear on what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I let him in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, it doesn't have to be physical intimacy. We can all allow, because we want connection, but then we're like up on our high horses.
Mm-hmm.
We're right all the time. We're never wrong. We're so busy demeaning people that we don't stop to realize, like, that's your anger, and you're allowed to have anger, but don't burn a building down if you don't know who owns it.
Good one.
I mean, that's the funny thing is like, I used to live in Raleigh, and I don't know how long you've been in Raleigh, but
wow.
I remember the summer of 2020, and I had friends of mine that were in downtown Raleigh.
Okay.
And I had friends that were stuck in buildings that were burning. And they were calling 911, and 911 was saying, we can't dispatch anybody. It's too dangerous. And they're like, okay, but the first the retail levels of my condo are on fire.
Oh, during the riots.
Like, what do I do? Right. And one of my friends was actually on the ground the day after all that happened, and the first time around. And she said, we're down there, and she said, there's people of every color and every race and all the things. And she's like, and they're sweeping up glass, and they're getting, graffiti off of marble, and they're just cleaning up. And
businesses that were destroyed.
Yes, everybody brought what they had resource-wise, and some people are, putting up plywood over broken windows and doing whatever needs to be done. And she said, I'm sitting there, and she said, this person came up and said, do you know who owns this building? And she said, I know what it is. She said, I'm just honestly going building to building. We're just going until we're done. We don't care who owns what, who did what. None of that matters to us. She's like, I'm just with my church, and they gave us a call to action to get here 8:00 in the morning. So we did with whatever supplies we had, and we all just are combined with our coffee and our water and our plywood and our pickup trucks and whatever we got to help our neighbors recover, to start the recovery process. And this person, saying, just really, she said they were just really hateful. Like, they were just really angry that we were trying to help recover. And the person said, do you know what this building was or what this building is? And she said, yeah, it's the chicken and biscuit restaurant. And the person was like, okay. And she goes, they have really good food. She's like, it's been owned by this. She's like, it's locally owned by a Black couple and has been for like 20 some odd years. She's like, they're in the restaurant every day. She's like, actually, she's like, this entire street is Black owned businesses. And the person is like, she's like, the person is standing there, and she's like, I'm this, fairly complected white girl. And she's like, I'm coming down with my Baptist church. And she's like, I got a call to action and I followed it. That was it.
Right.
And she's like, no intention of anything other than cleaning up and whatever they do.
And helping people.
Yes. And helping people out, and just coming together as community to let the people that are trying to recover know they're not alone. And she said, so this person is sitting there, asking her questions. And she says, I'm standing there and I'm talking to this person and I'm saying, I don't know who has what for insurance, and nobody cares. We're just here to help people, and we'll one step at a time. And the person was like, well, they have insurance, so they shouldn't have anything to worry about. And she's like, and she at one point in the whole thing had texted me and said, hey, do you have a good comeback for something? Because I'm mad and I want to have words.
Right.
I want to have words. Yes. And I said, okay, what's going on? So she tells me, and I said, well, as someone who did insurance claims for like 13 years, I said, yes, the insurance's job is to make them whole again. But the reality is that there's a million different factors in there that play into that. And I said, commercial is a whole different subject than personal property. And I said, who is the person that you're arguing with anyway? And she was, so she starts telling me, and she says, I got to go. I'll be right back. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, be safe, please.
Right.
And she said, she comes back like half an hour later, and she's like, she goes, well, you know that I'm white. And I'm like, well, I've known you for like 10 years. So yes, I'm
You're right. Kind of obvious, right? At this point.
Okay. Obvious, yes. I said in summertime, your face is one giant freckle. Yes, totally aware of that.
Right.
So she says, as I was texting you and messaging you, she's like, and this person is still, she's
taking
like,
her behind her. Yeah.
She's like the guy that was arguing is this black guy, and he's like, and she's like 5'1" on a good day. I mean, she's a teeny little girl,
Right.
and this guy is like 6 foot tall. And he's trying so hard to be like, to provoke her in some way. So he and his friend, like 3 or 4 of his friends, start trying to argue with her. And she's like, she got nothing. She got nothing. And so she come with her church. And so all of a sudden these, and they're like, we were here last night. We threw bricks and Molotov cocktails through these windows. We did this. They're trying to, and she's like, well, I'm sorry that you're hurting so much that you had to cause other people personal destruction.
Exactly.
So she's sitting there saying this, right? And all of a sudden she's like, all of a sudden it's like, she's like paying attention. She's like, I'm in this conversation. I'm paying no attention to anybody around me. And all of a sudden, these 4 people who are accosting her, like, start backing up.
Yeah.
And she's like, so she turns around and they're like, sister, whatever, what her name is. And they're like, are these people bothering you? And she's like, our church is probably 50-50 as far as like Black and brown people and white people. Right. So it's a pretty even mix.
Right.
And she said all of a sudden they notice that I'm like laying down in the conversation because I don't really want to argue and there's really nothing to say. Right. So she's like, my entire family of sisters and brothers is suddenly behind me, like 15 strong.
Right.
And she goes, and everybody has probably a solid foot on me. And they're like, how can we help you? And she said, but you're in the space of, what does love do? And if we're going to be in the space of, and she said, well, and I said, here's the thing. I said, what if they didn't have any anger? What if they no longer had any animus? What if they were in a space where their energy and motion was burned out with either like kickboxing or, whatever.
I'm a boxing coach. I keep stuff like that for people too.
Yes. Yeah. And getting these young people who have all this anger and who have been taught it.
Yeah.
To get them in the space of like, let's just spar. Let's just get it out. Let's just, what are you angry and sad about? Let's get it out so that you can't be brought into a space where you're causing other people destruction. Well,
exactly. And speaking from a person, who has been around plenty of it, this is kind of one of my passions when you talk your energy and motion, which I like to call energy and motion. And now I'm trying to get people within the community to first understand how to start managing their emotional energy. And then what you're saying basically is this ties into that. You have to first be conscious of yourself, be willing to acknowledge it, and then be willing to deal with it in a positive manner. And I've pretty much done all kinds of depictions or kind of like try to give examples. I mean, I even keep stuff like, say for instance, I try to give them an example, like something here. For instance, this is my emotions board, and trying to get people to understand what we call the difference between the suffering they're in and the high vibrations that they should be in, and being able to understand and navigate these deals. And I don't want to get too far into it, but the thing is that people don't understand when they haven't had any proper way, because I know myself, I had to learn how to do these things because
same.
I was one of those people who would be ready to tune into what I call the negative vibration, because it was a pride thing more or less, or how you handle things. And And then you didn't realize that, you're giving someone all your energy and you're tuning into something negative. And if you would have been conscious more of how you were actually handling the situation, and take a deep breath and kind of see where you're at. And then you can kind of start, as you call it. And I mean, I think your business is the perfect thing. You start transforming that negativity into a positive emotion, and your outcome becomes a lot better. And not only that, you start raising your own vibration and your perceptions of things start changing.
And I mean, that's the biggest thing, is to be in a space where, and I tell people, I'm like, outside people will use anger as a lever until they can't.
Right.
And so if you teach people like what you do with teaching, young people to, how can we feel this? Like your anger, your sadness, your frustration, your, rage at feeling dismissed is valid.
Right.
And can we learn to feel it in a productive way so that we can get to the space of then feeling the sadness and letting ourselves just melt down and cry and burn it out, so we can go, okay, once I burn through all of that and I'm no longer in my ego and I'm no longer in my pride and I no longer have to be right.
Right.
And I get to be in the space of like, wow, my mom just didn't know any better. My dad just didn't know any better. These people before me didn't know any better. So we're going to give them grace and love, and I'm going to choose a different path that better serves everybody.
Right. Exactly.
We start to change. And I mean, that's one of the, things that when I started coaching, I started coaching because I felt like there was a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And I have shifted, and rebranded a couple times. And I feel like trauma and emotion, especially, and especially mental health, is one of those things where we don't talk nearly enough about it. And for all the things that, that our Western medicine does well, mental health is not one of them. And we fall tremendously short. And I've had people say, oh, well, thank God for, the mental health crisis line. I'm like, yeah, it depends entirely on who you get as a person, because I've had people call me after they've called them and been like, oh my God, that was just horrible. And it's like, you're like, you're where I, want to be at some point, where I'm more on the ground and I get to be in the space of one-on-one, like, let's have the conversation close up and real. And the thing too is, especially with men, teaching them that emotion, that is not a weakness, that feeling sadness, that allowing yourself to feel your emotion is just part of being a human being, as opposed to, and notice, we are a human being, not a human doing.
Right.
So being in the space of, allowing ourselves to feel our emotion. And I tell people the arc of any emotion is 11 minutes. Because here's the thing, when you teach, and then people go, okay. And I'm like, because here's the thing, if you tell your brain, like, we're only going to feel sadness for 11 minutes when you start crying. Now that might not be true, because if you have years and years of sadness, you might be crying for more than 11 minutes, but at least it lets you know that there's a light somewhere. Like, this is a tunnel. It's not a pit.
Right.
So at some point you are going to get through the other side and you're going to go, like, I can breathe again. Because when you get to that point of being able to breathe again, you're going to make different decisions. Right, when you realize, like, this is someone's livelihood. This is somebody's business that they've spent years building. And, one of the things that I do remember from 2020, from the second night of burning down Raleigh, was there was a pastor that brought a bunch of youth, and they weren't necessarily involved. He didn't say if they were or not involved. He just said these are kids that are troubled kids, and he brought them downtown to clean up and help and do all the things and whatnot and so on and so forth. And they were asking him, and he said, because they need to understand that angry people did this. And that anger was weaponized, and that they need to understand the impact that all the shattered glass, all this graffiti, all this looting, all the things, that these are businesses that are owned by people in their own community. It's not some corporation with pretty glass windows. It's a person, it's a human being. And they were talking to one woman in particular who had a beauty shop. And she said, this has been my livelihood for 30 years. I don't know how to do anything else.
Right.
And I remember the interview and them, and, them walking up to her and them, one of the kids admitting, like, this whole group. And then one of the kids saying, I was here last night and I probably yelled at you and I'm so sorry. And like, just like crying, like realizing like this is a human being whose livelihood is this beauty shop.
Right.
She looks just like you, and you're,
Right.
you know, you made her. Someone told you to make her the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that reconciliation process, and to be in the space, and you know, going through and saying, you know, and a couple of the kids said, "Can we give you a hug?" And she was like, "Sure." And she started crying, and she's like, you know, you know, she goes, "I wasn't here. I left." She goes, "I was here the first time," but she's like, you know, I was told that, you know, she's like, my kids came and picked me up and said, "Mama, we're going to put plywood on the windows." And she's like, they got plywood on 2 windows that were just replaced like a month and a half ago. And she said, you know, we did as much as we could. And then we just let it be what it was because it got too dangerous. And she's like, I didn't know what I was coming back here to this morning. And, but being that space where like all these young men are there and they're, you know, cleaning up. And it's like, this is real impact and real consequences. And when we can teach people about that and say, okay, we need to go back to the beginning. And I use the analogy of, you're standing on the river and you pull the first person out of the river and you save them. They fell in the river and you pull them to safety and you save them. And then another person's in the river and they're, help me. And you pull them to safety.
Right.
And then there's a third person. At some point, you're going to go up the river and go, what the hell? Why are people falling into the freaking river?
And get to the root. Yeah.
Yes. And that's the whole thing, is when you get into the emotion of it, when you detangle the energy in motion, you take the energy out of the motion.
Right.
We're having a different conversation entirely.
But the thing about it, as far as that reaction goes, see, we have to start digging what we call epigenetically within our people.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And we have to start digging with the energy systems that have been misaligned with us throughout traumas that have been dealt with for 400 years.
Yes.
And
yes.
And this anger is a defense mechanism of powerlessness.
Yep.
Of 400 years of powerlessness.
Yes.
And the only power, they don't even, you know, and speaking as a Black person, this kind of they tear their own things up because they don't feel power enough to go into people that look like you's neighborhood and do this thing. You know what I'm saying? This is the only power they have, is destruction of self. But it just doesn't happen with the physical things. It happens every day with the physical things.
Yes.
Destruction of self every day, lifestyle, everything that's going on that no longer serves them anymore.
Yep.
But, and I mean, I say them because I've had to go inside myself and start deprogramming my same things. Now I have to tell people about the same thing. You know, I was, you know, it's all kinds of things tied into it. Religion can kind of be tied into it a little bit too. But we don't have enough time in this podcast to go down that road. But it's me trying to get them to understand that, you know, first off, this is the mental health. People are looking at mental health, but they're not dealing with the energetic system within these people and getting within the traumas and dealing with people and within themselves. You know, everything is dealing on an external level, and it's just dealing with symptoms instead of dealing with root problems.
Yes, and that's exactly. And the thing is, like, when I do my work, some of it is already infused to go 14 generations forward and 14 generations backward. But if it's not, I always say that, set that intention that we are going into the epigenetics and we are healing 14 generations forward and 14 generations backward, so that we get into the space of, what do you in the present moment want to do?
Right.
What do you so you can stop carrying that and be in the space of, I don't have to resent you for something that you didn't do and I didn't do, but I don't know any differently. And like, because we all learn our own thing, right? To be in the space of like, well, I didn't do this. And I'm like, okay, but whoa, wait a minute. You know, stop just a second. Okay, I get, like, you know, if you look at my family history, like, we didn't come over to America till like the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Right.
And so it's like, you know, they had their own trauma in Europe.
You didn't have, like, your people came over when the stuff already was going on and in place. Like,
and this is the thing, is, you know, is it's something where you go, okay, let's go look at what happened. And, you know, it's interesting because one of my, you know, a friend of mine had their genealogy done. And she is white, and she is one of those people who sadly was raised in a space where, you know, in a very small little all white town, and, you know, had all that crud, I will say. that again, no one knew any better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not defending it. I'm just saying it is what it
It
was.
is what it is. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
And so she had her genetics done. And she, you know, found out like, you know, where she was from and blah, 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 all these things and so on and so forth. And she actually found out that her, like, I think it's like her 7th great grandfather or something, was Black. And it was one of those things where she was like, well, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, it has over time shifted her. And I wouldn't ever say that I wouldn't ever describe her as a racist person. I would describe her as a person who was ignorant for a very long time.
Understandable.
And there were things that she would react to that you'd be like, and you'd kind and I'm the person that has no poker face. So I'd be like, what is that about? And she'd look at me and she'd say, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, just so that we're very clear, that was not okay.
Right.
Like, I don't care why you did it. Right. And it wasn't that anybody around her was slighted or whatever. I just noticed something that told me that she had a belief going on that wasn't going to work. Like, if we sat down and had a long conversation, was not going to work for me. So I'm like, let's just nip it like right here and say that is not acceptable to me. Now, on the other hand, having a friend of mine who is Black, and he had his genetic stuff done, and they actually in his family were looking for a bone marrow donor.
Okay.
And so everybody, like 50 or 60 people in his family, all had their DNA stuff done and whatever to figure out if they were a match for the person that needed bone marrow, which somebody was, thankfully. Right. But they also discovered that they made a very, he will say, shocking discovery. To me, I've done enough history and research that it wasn't really shocking to me. But he said, I discovered that, you know, how we got to America. I said, okay. And he said, my great grandparents came here on a slave ship in like 1823 or something. I said, okay, that's, you know, really interesting. I'm very sorry that happened. Right. So then he's like, that's not the part that sucks. And I'm like, okay. He's like, we found the ledger through someone else's research on, so there's a couple other plantations that have done extensive research. And he said, we found the ledger from the transaction of our slave ship. And I said, oh. And I said, okay. And he said, the person who sold my relatives, my ancestors into slavery was also Black. And I said, that's really not too terribly surprising. It's devastatingly sad, but knowing like the routes of where people came from and whatnot and who was there when. Right. I said, it's just, and I said, how are you feeling about this? And he said, I'm angry. I said, okay. And he said, because I always thought that was why I hated white people. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you. And I've known him for quite some time. And, you know, never like, I'm the kind of person that's like, if you got something to say, just let's clear it.
Say it, right.
And he said, I got to be honest with you. He goes, I had a chip on my shoulder about you for a real long time. And I said, oh, what happened? You know, let's clear it. What did I do? He goes, you didn't do anything. I said, okay. And he said, I had a chip on my shoulder because growing up, I was taught that white people were rich and they sucked and they were the root of slavery and all the things. And he had this look on his face, and it just still makes me teary because we don't dig into the why of things. We just have a lot of times again, like the epigenetics of hate. And we don't have any idea like why or any of those things. We just know that that's what we do. It's like we have turkey on Thanksgiving. That's what we do. Right. You know, we do this at Christmas time. That's what we do. As opposed to like, yes, as opposed to saying, you know, no one in the family likes turkey. Okay, well then what are we having for Thanksgiving? Because I don't care. Are we eating? As long as we're eating, I don't really care what we eat.
Right.
And so he and I had this conversation, and he was so he was in the space where you could tell that this deeply affected him, because he was like, and I said, well, when did you find this information out? And he said, a year ago. And I said, wow. And and he was like, you're mad, right? I said, no, not at all. And I said, have you noticed how you never treated me, that I saw, differently? I said, you were always kind to me. You've always been respectful of me. And I feel like same. I've always been kind to you. I've always been respectful of you. We always see each other. We hug each other. We go back and forth. We might be sarcastic with each other, whatever. I'm like, I adore your girlfriend. Whatever, the whole thing. And he goes, yeah, he goes, I'm glad I don't have to keep that secret anymore.
That was weight off his shoulders.
And he said, yes. And he said, and he just, all of a sudden he's like, and he just went, that just feels, and I said, you feel 1,000 pounds lighter.
Wow.
Like all of a sudden you just are in this space of like, you can be honest and say, he goes, I got to go back and figure out all the people that I hate for no reason. Yeah. And I said, okay. And I said, if I can help you with that, let me know, because I said, I'll hold space for you, but let me know if I can do anything, like if I can facilitate conversations or whatever. I said, I'm really proud of you, because this is hard.
It is. And a lot of times, as we know, a lot of times too, and I'll speak for this within my community, is that a lot of times, there can be some things, resentment, if people are holding on to kind of ignorance, but at the same time, you also have something that was kind of programmed within, the community itself of self-hate.
Yes.
And so, I'm brutally honest with things. When you still have my people still calling certain names that were used in certain places, and you're still doing certain things that were carried on because of the hate that, you would instill in yourself, and you thinking a little less than of yourself. And so with that, sometimes the things within you project on the outside. And so to go along with all the traumas that are going on within, because like speaking as, again, a Black guy who we come here from slavery, like I trace mine back to ancestry, actually to the last one that was in slavery, and found the actual plantation that was there. But I also knew that, two factors. Through all of that, there were also people who looked like you who were trying to help us. And a lot of people who died that do, and when it was not a popular thing to do. So walking around with hate, when all the way throughout history, when we look at people of different shades who have helped, that kind of gets a little ridiculous to start disliking people as a whole race, when as some people in that race have sacrificed a lot of things for you. Not only that, when we start looking into ourselves a little bit, such as myself, I mean, I have 17% Irish and Russian in me. My great-great-grandmother was Irish and Russian. And it wasn't something that was forced. They were voluntarily together. Things happen. So walking around acting like you're not a rainbow inside and hating different colors, it's kind of, we have to start getting inside that energy level system and start dealing with what's going on within. And that's kind of what I start dealing with my people when we're talking about hate, because that hate is a boomerang.
What I tell people all the time, like, don't put that on people, because you're like, you don't want that back. And I'm like, if you don't put out what you do not want back, because it will come back at you, and it will be an octopus on your face. And it's so, it's interesting too, because I was having a conversation. I'm a huge history buff, and I'm notorious for going down rabbit holes. And so I'm notorious for being like, oh, I need to know this and this and this, and going down these whole things.
Right. That's how you learn.
Yes. And there's a house that is about 2 seconds from falling down, almost due north of Raleigh, in a little tiny community. And I went and started doing research on it, like, on the house and who owned it and all the things, and like, kind of in the space of like, is there any chance of getting it added to the National Registry, and, to try and save it, last ditch effort to save it before it implodes on itself, because it's probably going to due to neglect. But the point of fact is that I discovered that, yes, that gentleman had, yes, he owned slaves. That was a thing at the, it was a thing. But what he also did was he didn't believe in slavery. So he got caught in one of those spaces, which if you do your research,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying there was anything good about slavery, because there was not.
Right.
But that being said, a lot of people knew instinctively that it was not a good system, and they didn't
Mhm.
necessarily hurt their people.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in this case, they would give the wages that they would have given them, because they couldn't pay them,
Mhm.
and they couldn't free them because that was not a thing at that time.
Right.
But they could create what would have been considered like a dowry, a savings account for them.
Okay.
And this particular gentleman had over 200 slaves,
Mhm.
and he had like never hurt any of them. Was in a space where, yes, they were enslaved, but no one was ever hurt. No one was ever bullied. No one was ever forced to do anything. It was like they were there, and in the giving them space to do their own things. And he would break up his crops, and he would take money from every one of his harvests and put it into accounts for them.
Wow.
So when he passed away, in his will,
Mhm.
because slavery still existed when he passed away,
Mhm.
but he put in his will that he wanted to have every one of his enslaved persons to have $40,
Okay.
which at the time was huge money.
That's what I was about to say. The time that was good, pretty good money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he had saved for each of them $40.
Mhm.
And he also had written letters for them, releasing them from their bondage to him.
Okay, so they had money to get themselves together, and they were free when he died.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
And the person who inherited the whole estate, including them at the time, actually challenged it in court in North Carolina.
Not surprising.
But here's the thing. They said, okay, but the will, are you contesting that the will is valid? Like the will is correctly executed? Yes, it's correctly executed. Okay, well then there's no argument here.
Right.
So the will stands.
Right.
So the next question is how do we get them? Like what are the options as far as like what we can do?
Mhm.
And so most of them, when he passed away, they all attended his funeral. And one of the unique things about him is that they all paid him respects.
Mhm.
And we're talking, and we're speaking from a space of like, we're going to miss him because he was good to us, which a lot of people were like, again, at the time were like, what in the world?
Yeah.
And they said, okay, well, how are we going to split up? Like, what do we do with these people? Because, obviously it's like, okay, how do we do this?
Mhm.
So his farm system became basically basically one of the first sharecropper situations.
Ah.
So everybody still basically lived where they lived because, again, they couldn't really go anywhere.
Unless they went north.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is if they were escaping, you couldn't just take your enslaved people and cross state lines. It was not a thing.
Right.
And so, it was like, how do we sit? Again, this was like until 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning because I was so fascinated by it that I just kept reading and reading and reading and reading and reading.
Yeah, I see.
And being in the space, like, okay, where did this end? And so at the end of the day, like 50 or 60 of them were sent to a relative in Maryland.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were able to, and then they were freed from there to go do whatever they wanted to do.
Right.
And the other ones were in the space where they stayed there at the house, but they became sharecroppers until such time as they were freed legally. And then and at that point, when they became sharecroppers, as was his wish, was that they also got profits. Again, the same system kept applying, and they actually found the breakdown in one of his ledgers of like how he would break down who got what and whatever.
Right.
So everybody that harvested and planted crops got money from the crops.
Okay.
Everybody that did this particular thing got money from this thing.
Right.
So they were all still getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
So they